7,000 feet above the English Channel, 180 men from Britain's 2nd Battalion Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry are approaching the French coast. They are an airborne unit, but they won't be landing by parachute. Instead, they'll be silently gliding in by plywood Horsa glider. They are about to become the first troops to go into action on D-Day, the Allied invasion of France. The war has been underway for nearly 5 years. The Germans have blitzkrieged through Europe, pushing the British out of France and forcing them to evacuate their troops by sea. Hitler has complete domination on the Western Front, but the Allies intend to break this stranglehold and have planned the biggest amphibious invasion in history. Codenamed Operation Overlord, the aim is to push the Germans back and crush the Third Reich. Vital to the success of this huge military assault is the British capture of 2 small bridges 8 miles behind enemy lines. If taken, the Allied troops landing on 5 beaches, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, can advance inland, defeat the German enemy, and finish the war.
This was it. This was the moment when the British made up for the early part of the war. This was their chance to strike back.
The man chosen to lead the men on this perilous mission, codenamed Operation Deadstick, is Company Commander Major John Howard, an inspirational leader and shrewd tactician. Like many of his men, Howard comes from a tough working-class London background. A policeman before joining the army, he has risen through the ranks from private.
D Company would be the best and fittest company in the regiment. More than a title or an emblem, it had an intrinsic identity of its own, a well-oiled machine, of which each of the officers and men was a working part.
Howard wanted to lead the raid because this was it. This was his opportunity. This was like being picked to play for England. This is what he'd been training for his whole life.
And the task that Howard has been given is nigh on impossible. Six wooden Horsa gliders will be towed across the channel by Halifax bombers. Once they are released from their tow ropes, the gliders split into 2 groups and fly in complete darkness without navigational aids. These wooden aircraft will be vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire and have no defenses, so they must use the element of surprise, gliding silently to their 2 objectives undetected. The first gliders, Chalk 91, 92, and 93, have Benneville Bridge as their target. They have to make a precision landing on a small strip next to the bridge. The second group, Chalk 94, 95, and 96, must land next to the River Orne and take Ranville Bridge. The pilots must avoid flooded areas and barbed wire that has been laid by the enemy who are expecting such an attack. The Germans have also prepared vicious anti-glider poles known as Rommel's asparagus. These thick logs, laced with mines, can destroy a glider on impact. If the men survive the landing, they have to cross a killing ground and silence 50 enemy soldiers defending the area from well-positioned pillboxes and trenches containing MG-34s, one of Germany's most deadly machine guns. Then, they must find and disarm any explosives that threaten to destroy the bridges. To maintain their momentum, they must capture the bridges within minutes, and with limited weapons, hold them until commandos landing on the beaches have fought their way inland.
What the British decided to do was actually kind of crazy. They were going to load gliders full of men and equipment, and then the gliders were going to fly in and land right next to the bridge.
The plywood Horsa glider is the Ox and Buck's battle chariot. Measuring 67 feet in length, with an 88-foot wingspan and a glide speed of 100 miles an hour, each glider is flown by 2 pilots. This unpowered aircraft can carry nearly 4 tons of kit, or up to 25 men armed to the teeth. But made only of light materials, the Horsa glider is highly vulnerable. Tough weather conditions and small arms fire could easily cause the aircraft to disintegrate in mid-air. And they were never designed to survive the type of crash landing they're about to make. The 6 gliders and their Halifax tug aircraft are now over the channel. Just 46 minutes to go before they reached their designated cast-off point on the Normandy coast.
For Operation Deadstick, surprise is the key. As soon as those gliders come in, the guys need to get out and get on that bridge ASAP.
The British adopted this method of assault from the Germans, who had pioneered it earlier in the war.
In military doctrine, troops have to advance silently towards their objectives in order to maintain the element of surprise. Nowadays, special forces infiltrate by helicopter behind enemy lines. But unlike the glider, it's noisy, so they have to land further away. The assault on Bonneville Bridge was bold, landing by glider right on top of the target. But it was something Howard's men were sure they could successfully pull off.
This kind of raid was pretty much unprecedented. The British were trying to do something very precise. They were having to figure out a completely new method of attack.
The men from the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire light infantry, also known as the Ox and Bucks, are a mixture of tough, well-trained soldiers and highly motivated wartime volunteers. They are one of several senior British light infantry regiments that have converted to this new specialist airborne role. The men learned the dark arts of unarmed combat, and then took to the bombed-out and evacuated parts of British cities to hone their live-fire street-fighting tactics.
They call this fibua, fighting in a built-up area. Fighting in streets is very different from fighting in the field. It's no good for armor, and you're constantly under threat from snipers and hidden enemy positions.
Howard had implemented a super tough training regimen.
Major John Howard was a harsh taskmaster. He drove his men as hard as he could, but he believed in them and he believed in what he was doing. And that made him, although a tough leader, I think a good one.
Through this intensive phase of training and exercise, D Company proved to be the standout unit of the Ox and Bucks. About 8 weeks before D-Day, they were selected for Operation Deadstick. For Major Howard and his men, the stakes couldn't be higher. The success of the British landings on D-Day rests upon their shoulders. In the lead glider with Major John Howard is Lieutenant Danny Brotheridge, the officer commanding 25 Platoon. It'll be up to Brotheridge to lead his men to their first objective, taking Bonneville Bridge. One of the few married volunteers in D Company, his wife is expecting a baby any day now. The tow line casts off from the Halifax tug aircraft as the lead glider crosses the French coast near Cabourg. Now the Ox and Bucks are committed. There will be no going back.
The situation in the Horsa glider must have been quite remarkable. It was completely dark except for the tracers of German aircraft fire. After release, the silence would have been quite sudden. The engines of the plane were no longer there. The German fire still going, but the glider getting closer and closer to the darkness, silently gliding down to the ground.
All the men can do now is sit tight, but there's a problem. Only 5 minutes from target, the pilots are still flying blind without navigational instruments, and they could totally miss their landing zones altogether. At the helm of the lead glider is Pilot Staff Sergeant Jim Walwork. The 24-year-old must not only fly the men into battle, but crash land his glider with the utmost precision. He will have to rely solely on photographic reconnaissance he has memorized in preparation for the assault. This is the top-secret film produced to help glider pilots visualize their descent into France. It was made by sliding a camera down a wire over a precise model of the flight path, simulating the exact pilot's point of view from casting off over the coast at 7,000 feet.
We saw and studied the most magnificent relief model of the coast up to the bridges, covering every land, bush and house. The full catastrophe, intelligence was superb.
But these months of relentless planning may be in vain. They can't see the landing zone. the pilots must drop the gliders through the clouds and attempt to get their bearings. Glider Chalk 91 descends rapidly to 500 feet. The two pilots are flying blind, navigating through enemy airspace using an airspeed indicator, a compass, and a stopwatch.
The drill in flight was to cast off at 90 miles an hour while turning onto the decided course. Countdown by Ainsworth: 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And I made a controlled rate, 190-degree right turn. Another countdown to 0, and another turn right and target lay ahead.
Walwork has made 2 turns and is now facing north, and his glider is flying parallel to the canal, exactly on course. Right behind him, gliders Chalk 92 and 93, also flying blind. With a minute to go, the attackers get their first break. The pilots can finally see the landing site. It aligns with a visual reference from their training on the 3D model and reinforces their on course. It increases their chances of success. Coming in blind, they may have missed the target altogether, and it could have spelled disaster for the raid. But they still have to survive the crash landing.
We came to what we knew was going to be the toughest moment of the lot, the crash. On the left, I could first see the trees that flanked the left-hand side of the landing zone, and we knew we weren't far from the ground.
Jim Walwork shouted for Howard to get ready. Howard and his men linked together in what was called a butcher's grip and took landing positions.
We were airborne again for a second or so, and then the final crash came.
I called stream, and by golly, it lifted the tail and forced the nose down. It drew us back and knocked the speed down tremendously. We got right into the corner of the field. The nose wheel had gone, the cockpit collapsed, and Ainsworth and I went right through the cockpit. I went over head first and landed flat on my stomach.
Chalk 91 has crashed right on target in an incredible feat of flying, but the cockpit of the Horsa is a wreck. Most of the raiding party have been knocked unconscious. German sentries on the bridge have heard the crash, but are confused and think it's a downed Allied bomber. Major John Howard's platoon must extract themselves from the wreckage and take their fight to the enemy before the fight comes to them. The German defenses situated on the east bank contain a concrete gun emplacement, a pillbox, and trenches stretching along the canal. On the west are scattered machine gun posts and bunkers, as well as a large gun pit hidden in a small field. Howard's seatbelt has broken on impact.
Everything went dark, and I felt my head had been knocked rather badly. I could hear the glider pilot moaning in the cockpit, which seemed to have smashed. I was conscious that everybody in the glider was moving.
Platoon Commander Lieutenant Brotheridge has to push his way through the open door and then orders his men to get ready. Ahead of Lieutenant Brotheridge is machine gunner and all-round man of action, Private Billy Gray. The 19-year-old from Northampton will play a critical part in the initial assault.
It was my job to be first out of the glider to supply the all-round protection while everybody else got out.
Their glider has landed close to 50 feet from the bridge. 25 platoons split into their allotted sections and start moving towards their target.
Each platoon is tasked with an objective. They know what they have to do. If a man goes down or the plan changes, they'll just crack on.
The first objective of the plan to capture Benneville Bridge is to neutralize the pillbox on the east bank of the canal. It contains the button trigger for the explosives set under the bridge by the Germans to destroy it if attacked. But in order to maintain the element of surprise, no one is to fire a shot until the first explosion from the pillbox is heard. The men will then storm the bridge and eliminate any German sentries before they can raise an alarm.
Mobility for the Ox and Bucks was the key. They were lightly armed with grenades and light machine guns. On the downside, it meant their firepower was limited.
The Ox and Bucks will have to take and hold the bridges with whatever arms they can carry, including a primitive anti-tank weapon and submachine guns, such as the Sten gun.
At the start of the Second World War, the British didn't have their own submachine gun. They needed something cheap and easy to mass produce, and this was the result: the Sten gun. It was made up of sheet metal tubing and held together with rough wells, pins and bolts, hence the nickname, the plumber's nightmare. The 9mm round had limited stopping ability beyond 30 yards. It was also prone to stoppages due to dirt and debris getting into the exposed working parts. In short, the boys hated it.
Armed with his Sten and grenades, Private Wally Parr, a maverick and colorful character, leads the assault on the pillbox containing the command center for the demolition charges.
A pillbox offers great protection when the enemy's at a distance, but when they close, you lose your field of fire and become vulnerable.
Parr goes to the right of the pillbox as he approaches, out of the field of fire.
I just took a deep breath and I screamed at the top of my voice. I don't know what made me do it. Come out and fight, you square-headed bastards!
There are ways of taking out a pillbox. Direct fire if you have it, or a flamethrower. But in this instance, you've got to get close, post a grenade, and spray it with lead.
Without hesitation, they throw grenades through the open door.
I heard somebody scuffle and say something, so I sprayed bullets inside.
As soon as the pillbox is blown, the element of surprise is lost. It's a game changer. The Germans know that the Benneville Bridge is being attacked, and the Ox and Bucks can expect a whole world of grief.
While Parr takes out the pillbox, Lieutenant Brotheridge leads the charge onto the bridge. Private Gray is just behind him with the Bren gun.
This is the Bren gun, the British light machine gun. It's a really chunky, good piece of kit. Well made, it fires a .303 round, which is a punchy round. It's going to put things down at the other end. A support weapon is to suppress the enemy, keep their heads down. That's what this weapon does, and it does it well. The Bren gun was a fabulous weapon. Resilient, reliable, was loved by the British Army. Many of the weapons out there weren't loved, but this one was the one they wanted.
The Bren has an effective firing range of 600 yards, over 500 yards further than the Sten. The German sentry is well within range.
My job, as the Bren gunner, was to rush to the right-hand side of the bridge. I saw a German sentry with what looked like a very light pistol in his hand. I fired, and he went down, but at the same time, he pulled the trigger. The bright light went up. I still kept firing over the bridge, and at the other side, there was another German. He went down.
While 25 platoons storm Benneville Bridge, the other two gliders, Chalk 92 and 93, crash the party. Howard's men are on the bridge when the second glider slides to a halt at the rear of the landing zone. Within seconds, 24 platoon are jumping from the aircraft and making their way to the embankment to meet Howard. These men are to clear the remaining positions on the right bank. Glider number 3 is just moments behind. With very little room to maneuver, the third glider makes its crash landing, but upon impact, 2 men are seriously wounded. Once on the ground, 14 platoon must cross to the western side of the bridge to help reinforce Brotheridge's men. Glider Chalk 93 has landed within 100 yards of the bridge and has broken apart. Lieutenant Smith, commanding the platoon, has been thrown through the cockpit to land unconscious in the field. Lance Corporal Greenhall has catapulted through the fuselage wreckage. and drowns in the swampy water. He is one of the first Allied soldiers to die on D-Day. The 3 platoons are now on target, and the desperate battle to get to the other side of the bridge is about to reach its climax. The men have just a minute or two to maintain the initiative and seize their objectives before the Germans can react.
They were trained to keep moving forward, advancing at a walk, run, or in short bounds, cover to cover, depending on the situation. A rush of anything more than 50 yards invited excessive casualties.
With the sentry's flare still hanging in the sky, Lieutenant Brotheridge, leading the men of 25 platoon, dashes across the bridge. First, Brotheridge has to neutralize a machine gun post before silencing any Germans in the bunker next to the local cafe. Gray turns right and is tasked with clearing an old building.
I went to the door of the barn. I slung in a 36 grenade. I gave them the rest of the magazine and went inside.
The Mills grenade. We've seen them hanging off flak jackets in the movies. It was made of cast iron and looked like a pineapple. It was a simple design, a pin and a handle. It was a great infantry tool and designed to clear just in front of them. And it worked like this.
Most of the platoon are now on the bridge and engaging other enemy positions on the west side of the canal. Brotheridge moves to clear his target with a grenade. With only his Sten, he then sets his sights on a German machine gunner. Gray has successfully cleared the old building with his Mills grenade, and as he exits, gets stuck in a firefight.
When I came out, someone started firing from down the road, the unmistakable sound of a Schmeiser, so I let rip with the Bren.
Parr and his section sprint over the bridge to join the rest of 25 platoon in the firefight around the bridgehead.
Up again shouting, "Where's Danny Brotheridge? Where's Brotheridge?" We're supposed to RV with him. It was spare parts going off, grenades going off. I started to run up the road. It was Lieutenant Danny Brotheridge. I knelt down beside him. He was conscious and said something. I couldn't hear what he said. He started to speak again and he just closed his eyes, gave a big sigh and laid back. My hand in the road was covered in blood.
Tragically, 29-year-old Lieutenant Danny Brotheridge never got to see his unborn child. He is the first Allied soldier to fall to enemy fire on D-Day. His ultimate sacrifice marks the start of an escalating death toll in the battle for Normandy. For the rest of Brotheridge's men, the fight is just beginning. "500 yards from Benneville Bridge, the other half of the raiding party are about to seize Ranville Bridge, following the same aggressive tactics. But only 2 out of the 3 gliders have reached their landing zones. The lead glider was cast off in the wrong area and has landed 8 miles further into enemy territory. It's down to 1 platoon that has landed closest to the bridge to storm the defenses and take it. Back at Benneville Bridge, just 6 minutes after landing, the firefight continues. On the east bank, the men from 24 platoon finish clearing the trenches around the pillbox.
Apart from firing going on, a great deal of noise emanated from platoons shouting code names, coming from all directions. It was all hell let loose.
With the Germans on the back foot, the men from Glider 3 surge over the bridge to provide reinforcements on the west bank. Having cleared the barn, Gray's next job is to take position in the large abandoned German gun pit, located 100 yards to the west. This will give him a tactical advantage.
When Gray jumps into that gun pit with his Bren, he has a commanding view of the bridge and the surrounding area.
For now, the enemy has been pushed back, but the bridges are still under threat. The Ox and Bucks are expecting a counterattack. Gray is to remain in the gun pit. With a clear field of fire to the southwest, he will be the first to detect any signs of the enemy. The other half of the raiding party have now captured and secured the second bridge. Howard's men have taken just 10 minutes to seize the two bridges. The radio signal Ham signifies the capture of Benneville Bridge, and Jam for the Ranville Bridge. Howard begins to transmit the concise but triumphant message, Ham and Jam.
I could hardly believe that we had done it. The operation had been completed much quicker than we expected, and in fact, much easier. They really had been caught by surprise.
The most amazing thing is the plan actually worked almost perfectly. The Germans were pretty much caught completely unaware, and within minutes after the gliders landed, the bridge was theirs.
To inform his men, Howard took his officer's whistle and repeatedly blasts out the Morse signal V. V for victory. The Ox and Bucks might have overwhelmed the German garrison of 50 men defending the two bridges, but their mission is far from over. And worse still, there's an even fiercer force just 8 miles east of Caen. Near Vermont lies the HQ of one of Germany's finest battlefield commanders, Major Hans von Luck. Under his command, up to 4,000 men of the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment of the 21st Panzer Division.
German unit behind the lines had come from North Africa, where they had spent several years fighting against the British. They were veterans, they were well-trained, they were equipped with panzers and other armored vehicles of a kind that would overwhelm the Ox and Bucks light infantry.
Von Luck's Panzer Grenadiers have been trained to fight alongside armored vehicles, protecting them from enemy tank-busting teams. They are formidable and tough battlefield opponents. The bad news is that the entire 17,000 men of the 21st Panzer Division have been placed on full alert. Within hours, Von Luck's men could be heading straight towards the tiny British force, dug in around the two bridges. Back at the lead glider of the assault, Chalk 91, pilots Jim Walwork and John Ainsworth have been slowly recovering consciousness in the wreckage of their crumpled cockpit.
I had taken a header through the Perspex nose and was bleeding from a head cut. It had congealed quickly in my right eye socket.
Walwork soon pulls himself together and begins to retrieve whatever weapons and ammunition he can find in the glider. The Ox and Bucks will have to face their armored foe with only the guns they are carrying.
Because they were lightly armed, they had to conserve ammunition, so they were taught to fire in rounds of 3. They were trained on enemy weapons, but they had to be careful, because these could be booby-trapped. This is the MP40 machine gun. It's a classic German submachine gun, affectionately known by the Allies as the Schmeiser. It was built for resilience. Its workings and action is a simple mechanism. The Allied troops prize this weapon, and they'd take any opportunity to take it off the battlefield and use it for themselves.
After a period of relative quiet, Gray and his number 2, still in the gun pit, hear a tank approaching Benneville Bridge.
Because Gray is in the gun pit, he's able to alert the rest of his unit.
I heard vehicles moving up along by the Marie at the road junction at the top. They were obviously tracked, tanks of some sort. We all became extremely apprehensive.
The men ready themselves on either side of the road as the German tank approaches. Their plan is to mount an ambush. The only weapon available for the job is the Piat, an anti-tank gun, one of the most hated weapons amongst Howard's men. It's given to Sergeant Wagger Thornton, a first-class soldier in action.
The Piat is rubbish. 50 yards range only, and you must never, never miss.
This is the Piat, the Projector Infantry anti-tank. It was basically a big metal tube with an enormous spring in it. It fired this, an anti-tank projector. This thing was heavy, and it was clumsy. During the Second World War, 40 fuses resulted in only 75% of bombs fired from the Piats actually detonating. I'm going to get this cocked and ready to fire before that gets me. This is now loaded. It's heavy, so I've got to get rid of it quickly.
Even when the weapon was new, it was unreliable. But the Ox and Bucks only have one undamaged Piat, and it has to work. Sergeant Thornton drops into a German trench with his number 2 machine gunner. They crawl alongside the road and hide in a ditch with the Piat at the ready. Wagger has just 2 rounds. Thornton is to wait until the tank is well within the 50-yard kill zone before he fires. Billy Gray on the left-hand side of the road has a clear field of fire. As the lead vehicle advances down the road, it's heading into an improvised ambush.
Sure enough, within 3 minutes this bloody tank appears. More hearing it than seeing it, because the wheels are rattling away there. I knew I'd have to act immediately.
The operator of the Piat would have been taught to aim for the tracks. This would have incapacitated the tank, but not destroy it.
I made sure I had him in the middle. I took aim, and bang, off it went. The thing exploded, and 2 minutes later, all hell broke loose.
In this instance, due to a stroke of luck, the Piat must have made a direct hit on the magazine because all the ammunition in it went up, causing a huge explosion.
We opened up on the infantry, and they just dashed back to the crossroads where they'd come from. 2 or 3 guys jumped out of the tank, and I said to my number 2 to give them a burst from the Sten, which he did.
Wagger Thornton has single-handedly eliminated the immediate tank threat with 1 lucky shot from a second-rate, spring-loaded weapon.
The psychological battle and luck played a huge part. If Wagger Thornton hadn't had that lucky shot, the other tanks may have engaged, and the outcome would have been completely different.
The Piat ambush is considered one of the more significant actions in the opening hours of D-Day. Only 7% of all German tanks destroyed by Allied forces during World War II were knocked out by Piats. Because of this lucky punch, the tank has been destroyed, and the Germans, not knowing Howard's men have only 1 anti-tank round left, assume they are defending the bridges with an arsenal of armor-piercing rounds. The Germans decide to pull back, fearing the loss of more tanks. If the Panzers hadn't made the mistake of retreating and brought in more tanks to push through the ambush, they could have easily overwhelmed the tiny force and taken back the 2 bridges. By dawn, A huge Allied invasion fleet had gathered off the Normandy coast. The Allied naval bombardment in support of the landings on the beaches begins.
The barrage coming in was quite terrific. It was as though you could feel the whole ground shaking towards the coast. It was very easy, standing there and hearing all this going on, to realise what exactly was happening, and keeping our fingers crossed for those poor buggers coming in by sea. I was very pleased to be where I was, not with the seaborne chaps.
For now, it's all quiet around the bridgehead for Howard and his men. But that's a sure sign the enemy are regrouping for a counterattack. As they had feared, with first light comes a deadly new threat: German snipers. They have moved in overnight and begin to target the small force around Benneville Bridge. They are positioned 550 yards to the southwest.
Sometimes snipers wouldn't shoot to kill, but shoot to maim. This enemy tactic is used today and can result in taking more men off the battlefield. Back then, a sniper may have shot someone and then waited for his help to arrive with the intention of taking them out too. When in the middle of a firefight, you can't help a dead man, but there's no way you'd leave a wounded one.
This deadly accurate sniping made all movement perilous over and around the canal.
The Germans are using the lethal sniper rifle, the Mauser.
The KAR-98 German Mauser was a versatile weapon. It could have a rifle grenade, bayonet, and also used in a sniper mode. It was bolt action. It would fire a 7.92 round and had great stopping power.
Wally Parr decides to check out the French gun emplacement on the east side of the bridge and comes up with a novel solution to the sniper attack. He'll use this deadly anti-tank gun, designed to penetrate heavy armor at maximum ranges, to full effect.
I'd never had any experience of one of these before. In front of me was a telescopic sight. There was an elevating handle and a traversing handle. I tried the mat and the gun swung up and down. It was gorgeous.
Parr and his crew start firing at sniper targets positioned along the canal. There are cheers as the snipers are silenced one after another. Looking further south, they see the imposing outline of the Chateau de Benneville. Parr swiftly fires 3 rounds. But not all the soldiers are happy with Parr's new enthusiasm.
Every time it started to get quiet, Wally would fire this bloody gun and Jerry would start off again. So we were all onto him. Don't fire the blinking gun.
It's not unusual, even today, for soldiers to be carried away in the midst of battle haze. This is when the officers and senior ranks really come into their own and just add a little bit of composure.
After firing a few more reckless shots, Howard has to step in and order Parr to stop. The chateau is, in fact, the local maternity hospital. Now, over 8 hours since Howard's men took the bridges, they are anxiously waiting for the reinforcements that have landed on the beaches. But the commandos still have to fight their way inland towards Benneville Bridge. 2 RAF Spitfires fly low over the bridges to check on their condition. The pilots make several passes, a number of victory rolls, and drop the early editions of that morning's newspapers from London. At this moment, the D-Day landings are well underway, and Howard's men have taken both bridges. But as the sound of Spitfires fade, Wally Parr isn't yet out of the firing line. Since Howard's men first landed, they have captured their 2 key objectives, endured a standoff against a German panzer tank, and suppressed a deadly sniper attack. But their enemy has one last trick up his sleeve. Nearly 10 hours into D Company's assault on the two bridges, the German tactics change. Now that the battle is turning against them, they no longer want to try to retake Benneville Bridge. Instead, the Germans want to destroy it for good. With both bridges lost, the critical decision is made to deploy their limited air resources in a final attempt to destroy Benneville Bridge. A fighter bomber, likely a Focke-Wulf 190, comes roaring down the canal towards the bridge. Slung under its belly is a 500-pound bomb. This fighter bomber is the Germans' superior aircraft used on the front line. The Focke-Wulf 190 and the British Spitfire have a similar firing range. The Spitfire might be faster by at least 30 miles per hour, but the German fighter bomber can outroll and dive its British rival. The men take cover. Howard shelters in his pillbox. Is everything the Ox and Bucks have fought so hard for about to be for nothing? The fighter bomber drops its deadly payload and swoops over the bridge. The Germans have lost both bridges. If they can't have them, no one can.
We had all braced ourselves for the inevitable mighty explosion, which would blow the bridge sky high.
The bomb strikes the bridge, bounces off, and drops into the canal.
What a bit of luck that was, and a wonderful shot by that German pilot.
After 13 hours of fighting, some of Howard's men think they can hear the distinctive sound of bagpipes above the explosions and gunfire.
Several of the men thought they were definitely dreaming, but I was straining my ears in the pillbox and knew at once it was the signal I'd been waiting for.
The British relieving force started marching up. It was a unit led by a gentleman by the name of Lord Lovett, who had his own personal bagpiper. Lovett was never one to concede anything to the enemy, and neither was his bagpiper. So they marched up to the bridge without taking any kind of cover, without trying to protect themselves from the German fire, with the bagpiper playing his bagpipes quite cheerfully and loudly as they marched in.
Despite intense enemy fire around the bridge, Lovett will stop for nothing.
Lovett didn't know the meaning of fear and insisted upon striding straight over the canal bridge alone, despite my shouted warning.
Major Howard greets Lovett.
Lovett and I memorably shook hands, and Lovett later claimed to have said, "Today, history is being made," but I can only remember getting him with, "About bloody time."
The capture of the two bridges under Operation Deadstick was completed in just 10 minutes.
The success of the raid had two major impacts. The first one was that it prevented the Germans from getting reinforcements through to attack the British beachheads, which meant that the British landings went relatively smoothly. The second was that when the British began pushing out from the beaches, they were able to cross over the bridges and make it deeper into Normandy than they would have otherwise.
Of the 180 men involved in the capture of the bridges, 2 had been killed and 14 wounded.
What was at stake was pretty close to the success or failure of D-Day itself. If the British didn't capture Pegasus Bridge and the Germans got enough reinforcements, including panzers, into the beachhead, the British forces could have been pushed back into the sea and the amphibious assault could have failed.
On the 16th of July, 1944, Major John Howard was decorated in the field with the Distinguished Service Order in recognition for his efforts in Operation Deadstick. Privates Wally Parr and Billy Gray went on to fight until the end of the war. They both remained lifelong friends. Glider pilot Jim Walwork also survived the war. His participation in the raid was later described by the Allied Air Force Commander-in-Chief as the finest piece of pure flying of World War II. To this day, the capture of the Benneville and Ranville bridges on D-Day remains one of the most celebrated episodes in World War II. Benneville Bridge was renamed Pegasus after the emblem of the British Airborne Forces, while Ranville became the Horsa Bridge in recognition of the gliders. Lieutenant Danny Brotheridge, the first Allied soldier to fall on D-Day, is buried in Ranville Churchyard, just a short distance from where his glider had landed. The road across the landing zone is now named after Major John Howard, the commander who led this triumphant, game-changing raid. His name and the actions of the Ox and Bucks and the rest of the raiding party will live on forever.